afternoon. Good afternoon, colleagues. My brief has been to say something, to reflect on the UDW to UKZN nexus. And so I think it was a unique opportunity to kind of offer a retrospective, reflexive account. And I think the thread I would like to develop is to talk about higher education transformation through the mergers. So mergers in themselves provide, as we know, a unique opportunity for transformation. And there are two threads I want to pick up on: leadership and scholarship, as I would say identifying signature features or characteristics of Professor Makgoba's time at UKZN. So if we look at the UDW context, I was there from 1993 to 2003, 10 years before we came into UKZN. And in that 10 years, we had 4 VCs. It was a context in which every year, without fail, there was a staff strike and a student strike. And quite frankly, when the merger came, I was sort of ready to throw in the towel, because when an institution is in perpetual crisis, it can't develop. Of course, when we came into the merger in 2006, there was also a staff strike and a student strike. And I remember I called Professor Makgoba and said, if he didn't deal with it, I was leaving. At the time, I was the dean. I want to characterize the two threads, the leadership thread, in terms of 5 features, and I want to give you an example of that which captures that transition into creating UKZN. I would say one of the first and most significant feature that anybody who works with him will know that he's very sharp and decisive leader. Where the different faculties were going to be and so on, once there were scenarios, there were discussions, it was decided, and once the decision was made, it was adhered to. So even though we made a representation to him, I remember, as education, he was not going to budge from it. But he did listen to the evidence. So I do think that the second aspect that characterizes his leadership is that he really values an evidence-led, benchmarked kind of leadership. I do want to say that in one of the features of the merger that I think, if I were to characterize one of the ways in which we were successful, is that because of this focus on being decisive and firm and quick implementation, so you don't allow a kind of dissent to begin to grow and foment. One example I can give of that is that in 2004, soon after he was appointed Vice Chancellor, within 1 year, by the end of 2004, the entire executive was appointed, all the deans were appointed, and by January, all 52 heads of school were appointed. And so by the time you started the new university in 2005, the whole leadership was in place. And that was a very important thing, because you then had the team to drive moving of entire faculties and all the rest that was there. The issue about focusing on evidence, I think it's in all the policy development, in all the work we did in the university, if you went with a proposal to any structure in which he was chairing, if you didn't have the evidence, if you didn't have some kind of international benchmarking, it wasn't going to go anywhere. And I think this was a very important aspect that, and you couldn't just refer to other universities in the country, but to refer to best practice in a much more global and international arena. And I think this has enabled the university to think differently of itself. A third characteristic I would say is, and maybe some of you won't agree, I would say he has a patient leadership. And I want to give you the example of that. This college model The first meeting in 2003, I remember as one of the teams in the steering committee of the merger, he had a meeting with all the unions, and at that time there was a staff association from UDW, which no longer exists. But at that time, the first meeting he called was to discuss the college model. And of course, you could imagine bringing in entirely different structure into the thinking of the institution was really quite a challenge. And when I reflect back now, I think at the time when he introduced the college model, and we had a very big discussion about it, we still retained a college, a faculty, and a school structure. And although he didn't really want the faculty structure and knew that it was a bloated bureaucracy, he also knew that people were not going to let go of the faculty structure. They wanted deans. They couldn't imagine a university without faculties. So we lived with the three-layer structure, and Senate agreed when it approved it that we would review it in 5 years. And I can tell you one thing, Professor Makgoba never forgets anything. So come 5 years, in 2010, he called me to say, please get the Quality Promotions Unit to organize an external review of international people, vice chancellors who have run college models, and we did a review. The review recommended that we should get rid of the faculty structure. And I remember sitting in the executive, and in fact, I said to him, not again, because we were going to go into a college reorganization and get rid of the faculty structure. But he really did drive that process and strive to create the efficiencies. I think that there probably is much to be written and thought about in how this institutional, organizational system change was thought through and happened. And I was thinking quite a lot about how that was achieved, that we now have the structure that we do. So it was a patient leadership. He knew it couldn't happen then, and there are many other examples that he will concede to a compromise in order to make another gain later. I think a fourth thing that is very much valued is the diversity in the leadership around him. So both in the deans, in the executive, I think he has ensured that we are a very diverse team. And I think that has had, besides the equity issue, the importance of that is that it has allowed the executive to be networked into all the major groupings of the institution. So for example, at the beginning of the merger, when we were an executive of 17, I wasn't in the executive then, but I imagine you cover the communities that exist in the university. Now we are 12, and we have a different kind of, in addition to the race, gender, and all of that, we also have an academic and support balance of having 6 executives in the academic and 6 in the professional services. So there were multiple sort of balancing acts that were done in the way the leadership structure was constituted. And the fifth and last one I'll mention in terms of the leadership is I would call it maybe the low-hanging fruits leadership, in that in each year that I have worked in the leadership, either as dean or as DVC, Professor Makgoba is very clear each year to select 1 or 2 projects that the institution, that will get driven in the institution as a whole. And one that I would mention is the staff PhD project. And it was a important low-hanging fruits project because there's such a wealth of evidence that if academics have their PhD, you will grow the research profile of the institution. And so, of course, if you just focused on that, so of course, and he focused on that. Firstly, there were I think in 2007 or 8, there were letters to academics. Everyone who hadn't produced an article got a letter. By 2010, if you hadn't gotten your PhD, you had to go and see the Vice Chancellor. So that project was really driven, right? And so now, We have 500 odd academics have their PhDs, and another 300 to 400 are registered. And I imagine if you don't have your PhD at UKZN by 2016, 2017, you probably have to start looking elsewhere. Anyway, let's take the second part, which I think is an important feature of the way he has thought about transformation that offers a lesson, an important understanding about achieving transformation within a university. And that is what he has called at the beginning, and others have, the knowledge project. But I want to maybe just be quite specific in this. What I see as the knowledge project is specifically about advancing scholarship. And so the proposal I'm exploring by taking that inspiration of the knowledge project is to say, I think we will continue to talk about higher education transformation for another 20 years unless we are quite specific or we try and pin down what it is we want to achieve. It's the low-hanging fruits philosophy, that unless we are quite specific about what do we think we can transform in our lifetime, how should we go about doing that? What's the means for that transformation? How will we know when we've achieved it? What will we take as evidence for that transformation, whatever it is that we select? And then whose responsibility will it be to ensure that it's done? And the reason I'm saying that when we constitute an activity as a scholarship, then it's taking exactly that complexity that Professor Makgoba talked about at the beginning and bringing it into some more specifics. And I think higher education probably is the one arena in which transformation is probably only going to be achieved if it is constituted as an area of inquiry, if it is constituted as a scholarship. And I can demonstrate this, not today, but in another time, on how this has been or what we are trying to do in terms of teaching. So an activity is a scholarship if it's public, if it is open to critical review and evaluation, and if it's accessible to the community. And so I think that's why a gathering like today is really important for, I think, not just talking in a very general, rhetorical way about transformation, but in much more specific ways about specific areas and aspects that we are wanting to transform in higher education. In conclusion, I want to share a provocative sort of observation or proposal put forward by a scholar who says that maybe the article is ignorance in educational research on how and on how can you not know that. And an argument is made that ignorance is a better criterion than truth for defining the usefulness of knowledge. I just want you to think about that for a moment, that ignorance is a better criterion. And the argument is that ignorance focuses on people and contexts, and that there are two kinds of ignorances. One is called blank spots, and the other is called blind spots. Blank spots are the things that we know, the questions we ask all the time. The blind spots are the things that we can't see or ask questions about because of the theories and perspectives and the methods we use. So I use that as an example to say, then if truth is not such a, maybe truth is a problematic criterion, although the TRC showed us there are multiple truths, at least ignorance offers a way to talk about transformation, because maybe then the question is not whether the equity index is true or not. It's about how something you didn't know before, you now know. So if a report comes on racism, and you can, of course, we can question the theory and the results and the outcomes, but if it allows you to see something that you hadn't seen before, then it's useful. So most of all, I suppose, I hope that this discussion on higher education transformation is not made so internal looking and navel gazing in the country, but that we recognize many countries in the world are trying to transform, and in the spirit of the Makgoba tradition of scholarship, we should always be looking outside and holding ourselves to a higher standard on what we do. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. I'm not sure how many of you are still trying to figure out the ignorance versus truth thing. I know my brain is struggling a bit. But in true Prof. Makgoba style and spirit, he has noted that there is a part B to the merger saga, and he's asked that we didn't have a discussion in the previous session because we didn't have time. If we can move and start with the discussion, I suspect, colleagues, he wants to be challenged. So let's just ask him some difficult questions or ask the panel some difficult things. So we're going to go straight into discussion, but not only this panelist, but previous speakers as well in the last session. Prof,
Chair, I don't want to be challenged. I just want people to discuss amongst themselves. This is not me. It's about the ideas that have come out of here. And I think if we don't give space to that discussion, I think we are losing people's contribution, and that's why I want that to happen. Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. We have 3 hands so far. So perhaps if we could, where's the person with the mic? Or we will start this first.
Just a very on. Can you hear me? Just a very quick response to the question that Nico quickly put to me, the black students, and I think there are 2 issues there. The one, of course, is the story of medical school, which is a very important story in its own right, and I didn't have time to speak to that. The other was that beginning in the late 80s and into the 1990s, more and more black students arrived, and what this highlighted for the University of Natal as it then was the huge disparity in the quality of preparation that students had, given the apartheid legacy effect, given that historically so many black schools were appallingly poorly resourced and some white schools were still very good. And the university's response, I think, was interesting. It was a kind of ad hoc realization. There was a series of challenges, and what the University of Natal did, and I think this was extremely creative, especially in the humanities faculties as it then was, is they introduced the so-called first level school, which was designed specifically to try as best as possible to address this disparity. There were various projects like the Teach, Test, Teach project and various others, and that's why when the merger took place, we had the first genuine access office in the country, which then evolved into the teaching and learning portfolio more generally. So it was just my answer to your question.
Thank you, Prof.
Thank you very much, the Program Director. My name is Joe Mbisi. I'm currently at the Gauteng Legislature, chairing the Education Portfolio Committee. I think first I must thank Prof for inviting me, that we should be here as people who work with him. And I can see in the program, Prof, there's no mention of the Transformation Oversight Committee. Yeah. I'm in that committee, which is chaired by Prof. I know that we have ruffled feathers. I know his peers and colleagues were not happy that he was appointed the chairperson of that oversight committee by the minister. The 7 of us are very unpopular at this moment. But I want to first say this, that I'm listening to all the speakers giving us the background and how they've worked with Prof and all that. But the main challenge that we're facing as a country starts at the school level, which we are not addressing. And academics, I know that they always like their space, not challenging the root cause of the challenge we are facing as a country. In Gauteng, for example, we are currently dealing, Prof, with racism at schools. You can see schools that were previously white schools are now 100% black schools because white people are moving to the far north. I don't know how far they're going to run to, but the reality is we are not addressing that particular issue. A lot of private schools are being established because, Prof, you said that we don't know each other as South Africans. Indeed, we don't, because, and we must confront this as leaders, that at some point we must say it as it is, because we realize that we're focusing at the highest level of education, universities, the ministers, each minister will come and will have a team that will focus on transformation. I've spent 28 years in the higher education sector. First as an underground operative, even when Prof was introduced at VETS, some of us were dealing with those challenges. Eventually expelled from VETS just after I was forced to leave. Go to VETS Tech then, which was predominantly Afrikaner school, which was led by the Broederbond at that time. Also the same things happened. But the thing is, Prof. Siepe said that we fight to have black managers, the vice chancellors, the deans, but when they are there, they forget the mandate. The mandate that says you must transform the institution. People become excited that I'm surrounded by a lot of white people. I'm the most achieved individual. And I think it's something that we must confront. One of the things that I am very happy, Prof, that we are continuously doing, and I was telling Prof. Adam Habib, just to share that, I think Russell said that the Makgoba affair still exists at VETS. Indeed it does. I remember that because I was a member of council at VETS. When we appointed Professor Habib, there was serious resistance from this core that forced Prof. Makgoba to leave VETS. The remnant's still there. And you can imagine now we had to put politics first to push them backwards to say, no, we definitely want this individual to be appointed. Now I was reminding him, I said, now you are too comfortable now in that seat. You're now forgetting the mandate. And I'm happy that the SRC took him on recently, that he had to understand that the agenda of transformation is not about removing a white face and put a black face. It's more than that. You have to understand that if you want to change the situation at the level of the university, more so you have the council that supports you. Why are you afraid to take decisions that are unpopular? To change, not only because, you see, when you harmonize policy after the merger, you don't harmonize policies to be accumulating dust somewhere. You must implement those policies. And I don't think academics and mostly those who are at the high echelon of universities are implementing that. The councils themselves are not transformed.
Thank you so much, colleague. We'll take the next speaker in the back. And while the mic is moving, dare I say that UKZN shook South Africa with the appointment of Dr. Van Jaarsveld. I think that in itself is a story about the issue being changing mindsets, embracing values, dealing with abuse of power, and it's about different elements and not just changing colors and faces and genders, etc. Colleague?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm not actually a colleague, I'm a student.
That's fine, you're still a colleague.
When I look around, I see that I'm one of very few number of students who